Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Tournament. So, this is a Tubi movie, Tubi. Tubi is a free app that you can, in fact, watch a number of things for absolutely free, without any kind of fees of any kind. If anything, you just have to I think, go into the app and then kind of go into Google and, like, they'll kind of take care of everything. There isn't any fees, but still. So going into 2B and watching The Tournament, I really enjoyed this film. Like, it does kind of break down like the Stone Cold Steve Austin film, The Condemned. It kind of breaks down like that, but like it breaks down in everyday place uh where the real breakdown of this movie, because I thought it was a pretty good action film. Like, I thought that it was like a pretty decent film, story wise and otherwise. Just kind of some interesting characters in here. Like, I would say that it's at least a solid good to great kind of category, just because the story is interesting enough. It could feel possibly like a one-off piece, but then maybe not. Maybe eventually someone will go back to this movie and still enjoy it. Uh, so, uh, so what is this movie about? So it seems that there is to be a tournament being put together with supposedly a large number of assassins who are to supposedly go off and kill one another. They seem to have these cell phone devices to be able to easily track one another's whereabouts, and then really it's just a game of who can kill who first, or who is to outsmart who. And really, it seems also we have another part of this movie where there's to be this guy named Powers who is placing bets on all these people. So it's kind of like the Running Man in some kind of way. If you guys have ever seen the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Running Man, where eventually there is to be also this like side betting kind of thing going on. So it seems that we have these hitmen, instead of doing a normal, common, everyday job, they end up going and killing off one another to, I guess, find out who is the best hitman out of all this. And so I really liked this movie. It's a real enjoyable piece, and and so reasonably, that's all the real breakdown that I think that I need to tell of anybody. Really interesting film, action packed. So, dare in fact, I think that's all I have to say for this, because it's an action movie. It's a tournament film. Eventually, just kind of notching down. Like, if anything, this could also feel like the Jason Statham movie Death Race, even though I know that there were other Death Race movies put together. Like, it kind of also has that flavor too, where eventually people are to get knocked down and stuff, like off of a list. Where, like, yeah, it does kind of come down to be like a feel of Death Race. So yeah, that's really all I got. So with that said, I think it's about that five time territory time to go just into spoilers about this movie and go more in depth about this film. Go ahead and check it out. I really enjoyed it. For a lot of people that just like to uh, see like a battle royale kind of scenario played out in an actual movie, this kind of fits that bill. We do have very much interesting characters like Miles Slade, who ends up playing this like white coated man who is to eventually go off and just kill everybody seemingly in sight, because he is a much more uh, like willy nilly killer that is to have fun with the people that he ends up killing. And so we'll eventually see that character eventually be in a part of this film. And he has kind of a calling card to him also, because very few killers do have that kind of thing with them. So with that said, let's go into let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie, because I think I already double fived it. So might as well go into this. So I think I've stretched it out long enough, or as long as I can. So Ving Rhames, of course, the guy you end up seeing on the poster here, uh, is to play a guy named Joshua Harlow. So we end up having him seemingly being mixed up in a game already in progress. So uh, it seems that we have one guy in this other kind of flashy suit that seems to be the friend of Joshua, to where it doesn't seem that this guy is going to want to easily go and shoot Joshua. It seems that uh, eventually they are some kind of friends. So all of a sudden there is to be this guy who busts in with this big huge gun and is starting to kind of just uh, shoot his way through this whole location, and realizing that Joshua has run out of bullets. So what ends up happening is Joshua's character ends up taking this meat sack, and he ends up putting his coat on it, and he ends up like tossing it down this stretch, and so the killer ends up thinking that it's him trying to rush through this open door, and come to find out that it's not him at all. And so while this guy is to be distracted, Joshua is to slide through all of this blood to eventually find this one weird looking gun piece, and goes and shoots this guy in the head with it, and then eventually goes off to shoot the other guy that it seems that he was much more of a friendly guy. And Joshua was to give this guy one last smoke before he shoots him in the head. So Joshua is, of course, the first round winner of this tournament. And so now it seems that there needs to be a reason for Joshua to come back to this tournament, because they want to see if this champion from this first round eventually can go through all these new people and beat them and kill them off. So Joshua is to be pushed back into this second round of game because his wife was killed, and it seems that there was some contract killer that coincidentally is inside this game that that Joshua now has to go and find and kill. But it seems that he is not the main focus here. It seems that a girl named Lili is to be the main focus for this second game. So we end up having this girl who is to be called Lili, and so she ends up waking up in the morning and is to remember that she has like this tracker on her. She ends up taking a shower. We of course ending up seeing either some cleavage of this woman, or it seems like she's of course wearing certain kind of clothing where we can kind of like see certain things, because this woman may or may not seemingly be wearing any number. Like it seems like she's wearing some tight stuff, so to speak. So Lili, so Powers is to mention that seemingly Lili is the odds-on favorite, as well as him kind of notching off some of the newcomers from this tournament. And so we go on and on and on to eventually start to show two of these tech guys who are to trying to figure out how they can get some camera footage on certain people to showcase them killing people off for these big money men who are tossing money around and putting on odds on favorites on certain people. So let's go back to Lili. So Lili is to, of course, have gotten room service, and so she's like, okay, this seems a little weird. So eventually Lili is to open the door to try to see where this person is going to come out of. And all of a sudden, the room service person has come up from behind her and to go and try to piano wire this girl and try to kill her. Well, I'm a little confused about the length or the width or whatever of this piano wire, because I'm like, is this piano wire? Because it seems that if someone were to try to like hold themselves via piano wire, like their fingers would chop off. Like that's the whole thing about piano wire. If this person actually had piano wire, like there would be no way of this person to legitimately struggle. Like this person would be losing fingers and all kinds of things. That's the horrifying thing of piano wire, is to realize how strong that is and how there probably is no way out when eventually someone just really have piano wire that eventually like a person's head could come off via piano wire. So Lila is eventually struggling with this person with this wire of sorts, but eventually she is to go and shoot this man and kill him off, uh, because like she ends up kind of like spinning around him, like kind of walking up this wall, going from behind him, and end up killing him, of course, easily. So, because again, Lila is the if Lila is the odds-on favorite, she's not gonna just die right away. That just seems absurd. So we eventually push on from Lili to focus on this guy who is to be called Anton Bogart, who I think they end up calling the Frenchman. So what Anton does is he ends up like he's a real parkourish guy, and so eventually Anton is to go into a bathroom and cut his tracker off of him, and so like, hey, what's going on? And so all of a sudden Anton is to chuck uh, this tracker into this pot of coffee, and so all of a sudden Anton is waiting for someone to drink that last bit of coffee, and coincidentally it seems to be this one guy, but then all of a sudden we end up having this pastor who is to grab this guy's cup of coffee and drink it, because reasonably he's just like he's a drunk from a bar that is having a hangover, and he probably doesn't even have money for this actual meal. So because eventually the waitress comes and like, okay, how are you going to pay for this? Really naturally assuming, because this guy has already been kicked out of one bar, like why not just be kicked out of a restaurant because he doesn't have money to pay for anything? So eventually this pastor is to go on, Pastor McAvoy, and like I guess they kind of took that name from McAvoy from uh, the X-Men movies, like McAvoy, who ended up being in the Curved Bullet movie, like that same guy. Maybe they got that from that name. I don't know. But yeah, so all of a sudden we end up having this one guy who's in this car who all of a sudden has this double barrel shotgun that is just kind of waiting for this pastor to just like be perfectly timed. There's to also be this woman who is to have this like sniper rifle, also just kind of waiting for the perfect opportunity to take any number of these guys down. And so Anton is eventually just kind of hopping from rooftop to eventually get to this sniper woman and snapping her neck. Um, but before he ends up doing that, this woman ends up killing the double-barreled shotgun guy, and then Anton ends up going and snapping the neck of this sniper, and he ends up taking he ends up taking her weapon, and like I guess is to like bizarrely just chuck it over his back, which I'm like, dude, shouldn't she have a bag or something to put this gun in? Like, don't you want to be more like to where you're obviously not having a gun right out in the back of you? But I guess here's the goofy thing. So this guy doesn't really do much with this gun. Like, you never see him with the gun again. So maybe he just took it for ammo. I don't know. Because you never see the gun again because it goes right back to like to handguns. So I guess he was just like, well, I guess I don't really need this. So eventually the pastor is to go off, and Anton is continuing to follow him because it's the master plan at work. And I actually think that this whole thing is actually really intelligent. I thought that this was really smart. So, uh, so eventually, what ends up happening is that this pastor is to go to this church after talking to this one guy about some part of his family dying. And so the pastor's like, well, is there anything that I can do? And the guy is like, well, no, like everything's taken care of. So, and here's the thing about these assassins. Every 7 years, they end up putting this game together. So I'm like, why 7 years? Do they have to kind of figure out where's the next location for them to conveniently have like this whole setup being put together? Like, did they take 7 years to orchestrate this game to where there's like seemingly a decent amount of cameras being set up for this game? Like, man, 7 years is going to be like a while in between these games, but maybe they pay them off well enough to where it's like 7 years of you not having to do a lick of anything until this next game is to appear. So eventually the pastors head to this church, desperately pleading to God, like asking like to like kind of show himself because he desperately needs him. And so eventually what ends up happening is Lili ends up popping into this church and is going to shoot this pastor. But she's like, well, like, why aren't you defending yourself? Why does it not seem like you have no skill of any kind? And because the pastor is trying to convince her that he's really legitimately not a part of this game. So Lili is to eventually trying to lift up this guy's shirt to realize that he has no real tracker on him legitimately. And so Lili is like, okay, there's some kind of weird thing going on here, and I can't quite exactly put my finger on it, but like this just seems wrong. So eventually, we just have Lili who just forcibly teams herself up with this pastor. Because all of a sudden Yuri is to arrive, this kind of big burly man, which a lot of people know Yuri from a lot of like Jean-Claude Van Damme movie remakes. Like he ended up doing like the last Universal Soldier movie that wasn't all that good, the fourth one. He was involved in that. He ended up doing the remake of Hard Target, and I think he ended up kind of doing anything that's to either have Jean Claude in it or to eventually be like a remake of Jean Claude Van Damme. It seemed that Scott Adkins was in it, or I've just kind of seen him in a ton of things eventually somewhere down the line. I think Scott Adkins was even in Expendables, where Jean Claude was also. So I don't know what the usual team up of that was for whatever reason. But anyways, so of course Lili ends up going and ends up kind of at one point like breaking this guy's arm, but eventually there's a pretty decent kind of shootout here. Uh, Yuri ends up drowning Lili into, of course, the holy water, and is to assume that this is all going to just kill her, and all of a sudden the pastor is to hold his shotgun to this guy's head and just be like, hey, stop! Like, I have this gun. Like, and Yuri's like, are you serious? So, but eventually, Lili eventually gets to killing this guy, and so eventually that forces both the pastor and Lili to team up. And so now Powers is to just forcibly have these tech guys just say that the pastor is just forcibly a part of this game and that he's a new player. And to just kind of see like if he's to be the odds-on favorite or whatever. Because Lili is to eventually go and try to call this game, And Powers is just be like, well, like what are you even calling me for? Just shoot him and get it over with. Like, why are you coming to me with this problem? Like, he has a tracker into him, shoot him, and that's it. Like, it doesn't really matter. But Lila is just trying to save this pastor because, like, she had ended up killing a person that she didn't really want to. But anyway, so pushing on. So now let's go into the let's go into the Joshua thing, and then we'll go back to Lili. So Joshua is to be in this like kind of parking garage, and there's to be this one guy there that is seemingly going to give Joshua information. And so this assassin is going to tell Joshua that supposedly the murderer that had possibly killed Joshua's wife, is to be this guy who likes to cut off fingers of people. And so Joshua's like, oh, great, thanks for that thing of information. So by the time that this assassin thinks that he has snuck up on Joshua, because the first thing he ends up doing is kind of like shooting Joshua's shadows, and then eventually the assassin thinks that he can sneak up on Joshua because his shoes are in a specific location, which Joshua isn't. So Joshua sneaks up behind from this guy who thinks that, oh, like, his shoes are right there, I think I got him. But no, like, Joshua ended up getting him. So eventually, let's push on. So the fingers guy is to eventually be Miles Spade. Miles Spade is to go off and to kill this guy in the dumpster and chop off his finger, because he has this like cigarette cutter where evidently he also just cuts off people's fingers. We see this guy is so gruesome that he ends up shooting a dog also, which is an awful scene in this film. And so, but it's just to tell like how this guy values no life whatsoever, and that he's going to kill anything that moves. So now back to Lili. So all of a sudden we end up having this kind of like soccer mom looking woman that is to all of a sudden like I say that because she ends up like tossing out this like soccer ball, I guess by these kids that are kind of in this like playground or something like that. And so all of a sudden this woman ends up getting into this car, and like Lili is looking at her as like, I don't know, this woman is kind of suspicious. And so all of a sudden, while these people are in this phone booth, eventually this soccer mom is eventually trying to run them over inside this this phone booth, rushing them to get out of the phone booth and creating this accident where eventually this person's car flips over. The pastor wants to go back and try to save this woman while Lili is basically running off because, like, dude, I don't trust her. So the pastor tries to save her, and the woman plays like this damsel in distress, but really she's just kind of shuffling for her gun. And then eventually she ends up going for her gun to just be like, okay, you're going to die, pastor. And then Lili ends up shooting this woman, and then they end up kind of running off because it's like, dude, that car is probably going to explode or a number of things, so let's get the heck out of here. So so that pushes them off. So I think we have Lili, who is to try to force this pastor to barf or poop it out, whatever this tracker thing is. Like, hey man, like, come on, like, let's get going, like, barf this thing up. Like, to me, this movie does actually remind me, especially with the whole pastor thing, it kind of reminds me of Guns Akimbo, where eventually Daniel Radcliffe's character is desperately trying to play the innocent role, but then eventually he has to forcibly shoot people and kill people, and then eventually he tries to take down the whole game that he's a part of called Schism. kind of reminds me of that a little bit. So, uh, eventually, Lili and the pastor go into this car, and they're just kind of driving as far away from all the other trackers as they can, because Lili is to say, it's like, well, the further off we get, the weaker the tracker is, so we just got to try to keep you alive for as long as possible. And plus, also, it's keeping her alive. So now that those characters are kind of off the board, so to speak, what eventually ends up happening is we are to um, be in this one bar where, like this strip club like bar, where eventually it seems that there is a bunch of players all in this one spot. And so the tech guy is to tell like Powers like, hey, there's going to be something really popping off in this one building. And so Powers is like, ladies and gentlemen, like this is going to be a bloodbath soon, because supposedly there's 9 assassins all in this one building, but nobody really knows who anybody is. So eventually they're just going to go off and just everyone is just going to kill everyone. So really what ends up happening is Miles Slade is to be getting a lap dance from a woman. And so all of a sudden this guy ends up walking in, and he looks kind of very, I think his name means Gene Walker, but I'm not quite sure. Uh, or maybe, no, wait. Maybe it's Asa Sadi? Yeah, that might be it. Uh, anyways, uh, so Miles is to go and see this stereotypical guy that eventually is to flash his gun off to the side, and so Miles is just like, really? Like, come on. So Miles goes off and is to quickly, while this girl's back is to be kind of uh, like tilted over, Miles goes and uses this shotgun and shoots this guy, and then eventually, like the whole place just starts to erupt. There's numerous guys all going and trying to shoot Miles, but one by one, eventually Miles is to eventually get to them. Slowly but surely, he ends up getting to everyone, and so all of a sudden, Joshua is to arrive into this building also, where it seems that there's to be this guy with an AK-47 who's kind of blasting this whole wall, and so Joshua is starting to get hit in the arm or in other certain kind of places. But it's kind of funny because eventually when you see Joshua eventually tied up in a little bit here, there isn't to be any like bullet hole wounds of any kind of where he was to get hit, because eventually there was to be this spot where he got hit in the arm. Like his clothes don't represent that, weirdly enough. So maybe he had a bulletproof coat on, I don't know, or a bulletproof blazer on, I don't know. So uh, eventually this all goes down to eventually just Miles and Joshua, because basically they both kill all the other assassins off, and when eventually one is to wake up, Miles is to put a bullet hole in them. So eventually Joshua is to ask Miles why he did it. Why did he kill his wife? And Miles is like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So eventually Miles goes and knocks Joshua out, ties him up onto this pole, and so Miles just really just wants to talk to Joshua, because Joshua is to ask Miles questions about like, hey, like, why did you kill my wife? And Miles is like, what are you talking about? And Joshua's like, did you kill a woman named Mary 4 months ago? And Miles is like, dude, I've killed a lot of women named Mary. Like, I can't keep them all straight. Like, I've killed so many people. And so Miles is to go and chop off Joshua's finger, because Joshua is technically the champ, and just to have a real just kind of thing of a trophy of Joshua. So Miles is to offer Joshua a drink, and Joshua's like, you know what, I don't want a drink. And so Miles is to eventually just go, like, you know what, like, okay, like, we're just gonna really get nowhere with this whole conversation because I did not kill your wife. Like, I know for sure that I did not kill your wife, but I know who did. And so Miles is to tell Joshua that Lila ended up killing his wife. And, like, I guess he knew that all along, but Miles just wanted to play with Joshua before he technically killed him. So Joshua is like, well, you know what? Like, I'll take that drink after all. And so Miles is to chop off a piece of his cigarette because he ended up burning. He ended up burning it into Josh's finger so that way, like, he won't bleed out. And so when Miles is to go and light his cigarette with his lighter, Joshua is to take the alcohol from that beer and is to spit it into Miles, which bursts Miles into flames. And then eventually Joshua, for good measure, tosses the bottle um, to eventually burst this guy into flame even more. And, like, Joshua had this screwdriver, had this, like, screw kind of unraveling a little bit to kind of tear through his ties. And so of course Joshua, like, was able to kind of perfectly undo his ties. And, like, he did not end up actually killing off Miles, but eventually Miles gets away to eventually bump right back into Lila and the pastor. So yeah, so let's quickly get to that. So eventually Lila and the pastor were forced to go to some convenience store, and they conveniently bump into Miles that is kind of all burnt up and whatever. And so eventually they start fighting it out, and Miles is getting some knives in his arms. And so what ends up happening is that Lila is to, of course, have to kill Miles because you have to kill everybody. So what ends up happening is that since the game is kind of going on very long, the people end up killing Miles themselves. Uh, Basically saying that he would have died anyways, so they basically just kind of are ramping up this game. Just be like, hey, like, we're kind of giving you guys some time. If you, like, don't kill this person within this certain time limit, we're going to kill him off for you. Because, like, basically we need a winner here. Like, this can't just go on forever. So what eventually happens is now we have to, like, with everybody kind of getting killed off, there's, like, this huge montage of people killing people through all kinds of means, like the lesser people that are killing people with, like, garbage bags and choking people, and all these kind of montages of people killing people, like random extra people, to eventually notch down who ends up eventually getting killed. So really this all comes to a head with there still being the French parkourist guy Anton still alive, and Lila is still alive, and Joshua, of course, is still alive. So eventually what forcibly happens is eventually Lila is to be forced to go with the pastor to get onto this bus and commandeer this bus and drive off, because Joshua is to eventually have this huge tanker that is trying to get to Lili. So while that's also going on, we have Anton who just appears on this bridge and is to jump off this bridge to eventually jump onto the bus. And so he, of course, is to be noticed by Lili, who's kind of shooting the roof of this bus. And so Anton is to go and fling his body into this window of this bus to go and try and shoot at Lili. And it eventually just bursts in through this window, and now both Lili and Anton are now having to fight it out. And eventually that just pushes Lili kind of fighting Anton to where he ends up falling through the top window to almost getting into the very bottom window. And while that happens, Joshua is going and driving and trying to ram this bus, coincidentally, while the pastor is to try to put the brakes on this bus quickly to maybe stop the tanker. But coincidentally, Anton gets killed in the process. So now it's really just left to Joshua and Lili. Everyone else at this point is to be killed. Like, you would think they would have some kind of random killer that ends up popping up at the end for an interesting kind of funny reason. So what ends up also happening is that there's to be this shootout between Lili and Joshua. And so what ends up happening is Joshua's tanker truck ends up kind of flipping over and exploding, and we assume that Joshua is dead and that Lili has to be won because they can't confirm whether or not Joshua was dead. And we end up finding out that Joshua is not dead. So eventually both Lili and the pastor end up making it back to the church. And so what ends up happening is Joshua makes it to the church, and then eventually is to ask Lili why. Like, why did she kill his wife? Because we have Joshua naturally assuming that whoever could have just waited for him and then tried to kill him, but no, like, why go and do his wife also and then try to get back at him? Well, Lili is to mention that the contract wasn't for Joshua, it was actually for Joshua's wife the whole time. And there was no, like, beat around the bush about it, because supposedly Lili was contracted by Powers to kill Joshua's wife, forcing him to go and do this tournament for the second time, because he would have retired and quit and wouldn't have gone into the second version of this. So now Joshua could have taken this as the truth and could have just left, or Joshua would have taken this as a lie and killed this girl anyways. I would have probably gone and killed her anyways, because, like, she still killed his wife. It doesn't really matter. Like, it's kind of like splitting wigs and whatever. But so Joshua stabs Lili, and then eventually he is supposedly to be the winner of this whole competition, because at the whole bus thing, the pastor is to go and barf out the tracker, so he's no longer in the game anymore. And so now Joshua is to go back to the gamekeeper and all the rich fat people in this table. And so what ends up happening is Joshua is to eventually grab a thing of wine, and so Joshua is to jump on top of this table, or really to slide or whatever. But so Joshua is to probably be dying at this point, and so now Joshua is asking Powers, like, why did he do it? Like, why did he force Joshua to come back here, and why kill his wife? And Powers is like, well, like, if I didn't give you some incentive to come back here, like, you would have retired. you would have gone on and had a baby and had a wife and whatever, and you would have never come back. Because, like, I'm sure having a baby would have changed him to eventually decide to not come back to this game. So Powers had to come up with some kind of incentive to keep him back in this game because he basically would have wanted to die anyways. So Joshua goes and takes the tracker from Lili and uh, shoves it into Powers' mouth, and then him as well as Joshua end up dying in the blast of it all while everybody's like rushing out because it's like, oh my god, he has a bomb in his mouth, and they run off. And so all the tech guys are like, yeah, I should probably go home. They're like, yeah, me too. Like, because we're probably not going to get paid. So really what we just see at the very end of this movie is the pastor, I guess, is going back and realizing how uh how he needs to go back doing sermons and stuff like that, and like really just like regaining his faith back. And so Lili is watching some of the sermons, and like I guess to just kind of see like what, like if the pastor is kind of going back on the path of being um like a guy that's kind of like not down on his dumps again, like he values his life again. Because Lili was like, yeah, I don't want to kill another innocent person, because uh Lili never wanted to kill an innocent person, and she ended up doing that with Joshua's wife, and she didn't want to do that with the pastor. That's why she tried to save him, and that's why she tried to like eventually help him through this game. To, I guess, trying to make amends for the innocent that she ended up killing in the other part of this movie. So that's really just it for this movie. I think I'm going to get out of here. I enjoy this film. I actually liked it. Uh, Really, this and like the movie Condemned, like it feels like a really good movie. Like especially the part where the Anton guy is like parkouring through all those buildings. Like I was like, holy crap! Like I like parkour kind of action sequences because they just make it more interesting. Um, Plus you really get to like see like how, like I think stuff like a parkour character kind of keeps an action movie much more interesting, because you're kind of like, I don't care if it's just kind of him running through all these buildings and hopping and jumping over everywhere. I think that that's a more interesting thing to watch, um, just because you're kind of on the edge of your seat just going like, man, like what would happen if this guy just slips and falls in one part of this movie, and like so he doesn't look as cool as he does or whatever. But that's not going to happen because this guy has to look really cool. um, we also had the one spot where Anton is going and trying to kill Lili and the pastor, and they're in that cop car. Where eventually, like Lili is just going backwards and is just like going backwards through this place, and eventually we get this really cool, like that is a really cool scene in the movie, the whole cop car scene, where eventually we find one of the hitman is actually like to look like a policeman, but really he's actually just a hitman, and so Lili is to figure that out, and then eventually they go into the cop car, and so all of a sudden like Anton is trying to figure out a way to get on this car, or Lili is trying to figure out a way um to also try to kill Anton. And there's this one spot where uh like Anton is basically holding on to uh, the front of this car with just his legs, and he's being like slid through this like dirt road, and I'm just like, come on, like I think that he probably had some kind of like thing under his back. Like I don't buy that like this guy was just being technically dragged through the road and whatever. But then eventually he grabbed onto this one like pipe, and he like swung, and he like got out of the way of getting run over by this car, which I thought that was a really cool sequence. I really liked I really liked that one spot. That was kind of cool. But anyways, hopefully I've gotten most of this movie at least out of the way, talked about it or whatever. Really interesting movie, but other than that, I'm gonna interesting my way out of here. So goodbye, goodbye, bye everybody, bye everybody.